I'm Evelyn Mercer. After 12 years of pouring my soul into NovaCraft, I sat in a crowded room and watched my designs, my work, presented under someone else's name. No credit, no acknowledgement, just silence. It broke something in me, but instead of begging to stay, I walked away. Not in defeat, but in defiance. Because staying quiet was starting to cost me more than I was willing to pay. Please listen to my story until the very end. It's more than a tale of betrayal. It's about reclaiming worth. And after you've heard it, come back and tell me. Was I foolish for walking out instead of fighting harder? Would you have done the same? I'd really like your advice. I remember that morning so clearly, light snow falling just enough to coat the sidewalks, the kind that doesn't crunch under your feet, but softens each step. I didn't even feel the cold. My scarf was loose, gloves forgotten, but I walked to the office with this strange, quiet calm, like I already knew something was coming. 12 years is a long time to spend anywhere. And for me, NovaCraft had become more than just a job. It was a rhythm, a routine, a place where I had quietly buried pieces of myself in sketches and prototypes and long evenings of redrafting. I'd started there when my hair was only beginning to gray, when my youngest had just graduated college, and when I still believed that if you just kept your head down and worked hard, you'd always be seen. The office was already buzzing when I walked in. Everything looked the same, technically. Those modern white desks, the smell of overbrewed coffee, the low hum of forced cheerfulness from marketing. But something about the way people moved that morning felt off. Polished. Performed. I passed by the glass conference room on my way to my desk. Kara Ellington was already in there, high heels sharp against the tile, gesturing with the same kind of confidence that comes from knowing everyone's watching. She'd only been with us for 3 months, brought in from some boutique agency in New York. Young, sleek, with a LinkedIn profile that read more like a brand pitch than a resume. Creative director, visionary, disruptor, and apparently very good at turning invisible things into hers. We had our weekly team sync at 10. I took my usual seat, second from the end, close enough to contribute, far enough to listen. Kara started the meeting with her usual smile, a little too tight to be real. Today, she said, we're previewing our newest concept line for the spring showcase. I already knew what she was going to show. I'd seen the hints around the studio, mock-ups that borrowed heavily from the sketches I'd been refining on my own time. Ideas I hadn't yet shared formally, mostly because I'd been raised to believe that good work speaks for itself. Apparently, mine had spoken too loudly. She clicked the remote, and the projector lit up with a series of slides that felt like looking into my own private journal. Organic curves. The earth-toned palette. That layered wood texture I'd been obsessed with for weeks. The young designers flanking her looked proud, nervous, but proud, as if they had truly birthed those ideas themselves. No mention of me. Not once. I sat still, hands folded over my notepad. I didn't say a word. I didn't flinch. I just kept writing, though I wasn't even sure what I was jotting down. Maybe it was just something to hold on to. I wasn't angry, not yet. That came later. In the moment, all I felt was a kind of hollowness, like being in a room you've lived in for years and realizing, all of a sudden, that none of the furniture belongs to you anymore. After the meeting ended and everyone filed out, laughing too loud and pretending not to glance at me, I stayed seated. Just 10 minutes. Long enough to hear the footsteps fade. Long enough to let myself breathe. I thought about heading over to Hope Cafe, the little cafe across the street where I used to go when the noise of the office got too loud. But I didn't move. I just sat there, watching my own reflection in the black conference screen. Funny how quickly things shift. How fast a place can stop feeling like yours. 12 years. That's a lot of birthdays, a lot of late nights, a lot of drafts torn up and done over again. I had believed, really believed, that loyalty was a kind of shield. That if you gave your best, the people around you would guard it. Maybe that was naive. But I wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. At least, that's what I told myself. Still, that morning lingered differently. The air felt thinner somehow. Like someone had cracked a window in a room I didn't know I'd been suffocating in. I still didn't think I'd leave NovaCraft. Not then. But that morning, for the first time in 12 years, I knew. They had started writing a new story. And I wasn't in it anymore. It started quietly, not with shouting or drama or anything big enough to call attention to itself. Just little shifts, like when someone rearranges your kitchen drawers and you keep reaching for the spoon in the wrong place. I'd walk into the office and people would glance up, then quickly look back at their screens. Not rudely, just deliberately avoiding me. Meetings that used to be routine somehow didn't land on my calendar. Files were shared without my name attached. At first, I told myself it was just a tech glitch. Maybe someone forgot to CC me. Maybe the interns were still getting used to the workflows. But the pattern didn't break. In fact, it grew. I'd sit at my desk, watching group chats unfold that I was no longer a part of. I'd pass by impromptu huddles in the design room where my presence didn't even register. There was no hostility, just silence. That strange, sharp kind of silence where your absence feels planned. So, I started writing things down. Not just for my memory, but as a kind of protection. Notes on timelines, emails I'd sent, sketches I'd submitted. Nothing dramatic, just small breadcrumbs in case one day I had to prove I'd been there. Contributed. Created. My mother used to tell me, when they stop listening to your words, learn to read their silences. I used to think she meant relationships. Turns out, she meant everything. That week dragged. I kept my head down, though. I wasn't ready to believe what I suspected was happening. By Friday, I needed a break from the fluorescent lights and the tightening knot in my stomach. I left the office early and headed over to Hope Cafe, my old hideout on difficult days. The smell of roasted beans and warm cinnamon wrapped around me the moment I stepped in, and I felt like I could breathe. I was halfway through my second cup of coffee, flipping through my sketch journal, when I heard someone say my name. "Didn't expect to find you here," came a familiar voice. I looked up and saw Jeanette Crowley, gray sweater, faded jeans, and the same kind smile I remembered from 5 years ago. "Jeanette," I said, standing to hug her.
Wow.
"It's been a while." She sat down across from me, without asking. I heard Kara got the creative director spot. I nodded slowly. 3 months ago. "She's got a reputation," Jeanette said, stirring her tea without looking at me. "Charisma, speed, no breaks." "She's efficient," I said carefully. Jeanette raised an eyebrow. They used that word with me too. We sat in silence for a beat. Then she leaned in and lowered her voice. "When they pushed me out, they made it sound like a gift. Like they were freeing up space for me to do something new. Said I'd outgrown the culture. And I almost believed it. I looked at her. Really looked. The last time I saw Jeanette, she was trying to get her lighting line picked up by a boutique chain. Now her eyes had the calm of someone who'd been through the fire and come out understanding which parts of her didn't burn. She reached across the table and lightly tapped my notebook. "If you're writing things down, you already know what's happening." I sighed. Maybe. But what am I supposed to do? Make noise and look like I can't keep up with the new team? Jeanette gave a half smile. "If you don't define your boundaries, they'll write them for you. And trust me, their version will always be smaller." I walked back to the office that afternoon with a strange clarity. My feet dragged less, my shoulders sat higher. But just as I was settling in, I opened one of the project files I'd worked on, an eco-dining set design I'd spent 2 weekends refining. It was the kind of concept that wasn't fully formed yet, but it had potential. My handwriting, my renderings, the texture choices, they were unmistakably mine. But the version in the system was different. Slightly. Enough to look new if you didn't know better. And the name tagged under the document? Kara Ellington. I blinked at the screen, not quite processing what I was seeing. I double-checked the metadata. Creation date, identical to the week I'd first sketched it in my notebook. I printed it out and brought it to Kara's office. She looked up from her laptop, flashing that polished, professional smile. "Something wrong." I held up the printout. I noticed the base of the design. This was originally my sketch from the natural texture folder. Kara tilted her head slightly. I thought it was part of the group archive. Honestly, we've all been pulling from the same folders for weeks." "It wasn't labeled for group use," I said, keeping my voice steady. She gave a light shrug. If you contributed to it, great. But if you didn't say anything before now, well, how could I have known? I nodded slowly, backing out of the room before I said something I couldn't take back. Back at my desk, I stared at the blank document in front of me, trying to find the words. I thought about Jeanette's voice in that cafe, calm but firm. And for the first time in a very long time, I wondered if maybe silence had been doing more harm than good. The announcement came on a Tuesday morning. An all-hands meeting, mandatory attendance. No details, just a line in bold from HR. Presentation of spring product line, led by Kara Ellington. My stomach tensed the moment I read it. I don't know why I expected anything different. The last few weeks had been building toward this, little omissions, side glances, files reshaped and renamed. Still, I held on to some thin thread of hope. Maybe there'd be a mention, a footnote, a line in fine print that said I mattered. The conference hall had been dressed up like it was awards night. Bright spotlights, branded banners, sleek display boards along the walls. I took a seat near the middle, not front row, not in the back, just neutral. Safe. The room filled quickly. People chatted in that eager, upward-tilted tone that comes when something's about to be unveiled. When people are hungry to attach themselves to whatever's next. Kara took the stage like it was hers, and I suppose in that moment it was. All polish and poise in a navy pantsuit that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. She smiled like she knew exactly where every camera was pointed. I'm proud, she began, to present the first full product line created under my direction at NovaCraft. Applause broke out before she'd even clicked the remote. Then came the first slide. There it was. My design. Not just the idea, my form, my composition, my signature visual language. The curved wood grain that I'd studied in the trees near my apartment. The neutral tones layered with just enough contrast to feel both modern and warm. The same name I'd scribbled in the corner of my sketchbook, the Haven series. Only now, it was framed in Kara's words, her branding. A minimalist return to natural comfort, she said, gesturing toward it like she was giving birth to it right then and there. I felt my breath catch. People clapped. Some nodded. A few even whispered to one another, clearly impressed. I saw one of the junior designers glance at me for a second. Just a flicker. Then he looked away. I didn't say anything. My hands stayed on my notebook, pen hovering just above the page. I wrote nothing. I simply watched. She went on to showcase 5 more pieces. 3 of them had traces of me. The kind of influence you only notice if you've lived inside the work. But no one asked. No one turned to me again. Afterward, people filed out into the hallway, buzzing with praise. Kara stood near the exit, graciously accepting compliments. I didn't want to confront her there, in that crowd, but my legs moved on their own. She saw me coming and gave a tight smile. Well, I said, congratulations. Thank you, she replied, as if we were old friends sharing a quiet win. I noticed the Haven series made the cut. I added, keeping my tone level. It looked familiar.
Kara didn't blink.
It tested well. The executive team really believes in the concept. Right, I said. Just wondering why no one from the original team got a mention. She tilted her head, like I'd asked her why the sky was blue. Recognition doesn't always have to be public. We work as a team, and honestly, it's better to highlight one voice to unify the vision. Makes it easier for the brand. My throat went dry. She leaned in slightly, her voice dropping. I wouldn't take it personally. You've had a great run here. Maybe it's time to think about what kind of legacy you want to leave. That last sentence hit harder than she probably intended. Or maybe exactly as she intended. I nodded, turned, and walked straight to my desk. I didn't pack up. Didn't slam drawers or make a scene. I opened my HR portal, selected personal leave, and submitted the form. 1 week. No explanation. I clicked confirm and stood. No one asked where I was going. No one even looked up. Outside, the sky had turned pale gray. It was the kind of day where the light can't decide if it wants to commit to sun or storm. I walked aimlessly for a bit, past the riverfront, past the bookshop I used to love when my kids were still small. I sat on a bench with a half-cold latte and just let myself feel. Not anger. Not yet. Just loss. I pulled out my sketchbook and flipped through the pages. There were notes, rough outlines, bits of color tests. Months of thinking, wondering, adjusting. I'd poured so much of myself into those designs. Not for credit, not for applause, but because I believed in the work. And now it was being paraded around like a flagship project by someone who'd known the team for less time than it took to grow a houseplant. That's when it hit me, not the betrayal, but the realization that I'd let this happen. I had made myself easy to erase. Because I kept believing that if you do the right thing long enough, someone would notice. And maybe they do. But sometimes they notice just enough to steal it. The email landed in my inbox just after lunch on a Wednesday. The subject line was vague. Career support discussion. That should have been my first clue. Nothing good ever comes from a subject line like that. I clicked it open, heart already sinking. It was from someone in HR I barely knew, someone who probably didn't even know what I looked like. We've noticed some recent misalignment in project engagement. It began like I was a misplaced puzzle piece. After discussions with Kara, we'd like to propose a shift in your role to a part-time advisory position, where your experience can best support emerging design leads. I read it twice. No mention of performance concerns. No questions. No space for conversation. Just a quiet, formal way of saying, you're no longer part of the core. But we'll let you sit nearby, if you behave. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling for a long time. The vent above me buzzed faintly. Somewhere down the hallway, someone laughed. They were offering me a smaller chair at a smaller table and expecting me to thank them for it. I could have taken it. It wasn't an outright demotion, not on paper. I'd still keep my salary, still get my office. I could have coasted to retirement, 3 or 4 more years, head down, quiet, forgettable. But once you've seen your name erased from the credits, you can't unsee it. Later that night, I was sitting at my kitchen table with a lukewarm bowl of soup and my laptop open when Jeanette's message came through. Thought of you, Chicago Design Expo accepting independent submissions. Deadline in 2 months. No corporate affiliation needed. She attached a flyer. I stared at it for a while. A clean, minimal layout with bold lettering, fresh voices. Timeless craft. My first instinct was to close the window. I hadn't submitted anything under my own name in years. Everything had been filtered through NovaCraft, through teams and branding guidelines and marketing briefs. I didn't even know what my work looked like anymore on its own. But something in that line caught me. No corporate affiliation needed. I thought about the first time I held a sketchbook, back in college. Before I had bills or deadlines. Before client-ready became more important than honest. I thought about how I used to draw to understand the world, not to sell it. That night, I went digging through old boxes in the closet. Pulled out my earliest design journals, the ones with coffee stains and bent pages. There were still ideas in there I'd never brought to life. Concepts no company would have greenlit, but ones that felt entirely mine. The next morning, I went to the office, like usual. Said good morning to the receptionist, nodded at the intern restocking the printer paper. Sat at my desk, opened the HR email again, and reread every word. Then I opened a new document and started drafting my resignation letter. But I didn't send it. Not yet. Instead, I minimized the window and stared out at the parking lot. Snow had started to fall again, light, powdery, drifting in slow circles like it didn't have anywhere to be. I'd spent so long shaping myself to fit into this place, I'd forgotten what it felt like to stand on my own. I was scared more than I wanted to admit. Scared to leave the steady paycheck. Scared to lose the title. Scared to be seen as difficult, or bitter, or worse, irrelevant. But I was more scared of what would happen if I stayed. If I took their offer, I'd be choosing invisibility. I glanced around the room. My worn chair, the faded nameplate on my desk, the whiteboard where I used to jot ideas for the team. All of it had once felt permanent. Now it felt like borrowed space. And that's when it hit me. If the only way I got to stay was by agreeing to be silent, then I was never really part of it to begin with. I shut my laptop. stood up, looked around the office one last time. Not with anger, not with sadness, just with the quiet realization that it was time to go before I forgot how to be seen. The snow was thick that night. I watched it fall in slow, steady waves through the window of my apartment. The city below hushed like it was holding its breath. The radiator clanked every so often, trying its best to keep up with the bitter Minneapolis cold, and my small kitchen table was covered in papers, sketches, printed emails, time-stamped drafts, a mix of ink and digital trails that told a story no one else seemed to care about. Until now, I never thought I'd need to protect my ideas like this. I was the kind of designer who believed the work should speak for itself. But the truth is, it doesn't matter how clearly something speaks if no one's listening, or worse, if someone else is already speaking over you. I pulled up the email Jeanette had forwarded again, the one about the Chicago Design Expo. I'd read it at least 10 times, but this time, the words sat differently. There was a line at the bottom that I kept coming back to: independent entries welcome. Original authorship only. My name. My work.
My voice.
It scared me more than I wanted to admit. A part of me still hesitated. NovaCraft had been my second home for 12 years. I knew the hallway creaks, the way the carpet dipped near the elevator, which mugs in the break room still had handles. I'd mentored half the design team. I'd poured late nights and early mornings into that company, thinking that loyalty meant permanence. But then I remembered Kara's face at that product launch, how confidently she spoke about my work like it was hers. Not just the concepts, the naming, the inspiration, even the damn tagline I'd jotted down in my sketchbook 6 weeks earlier. Her delivery had been smooth, practiced, clinical. Not a hint of doubt in her eyes. That's what stung the most, how easy it was for her. And then I heard Jeanette's voice again, quiet but certain. They didn't push you out. They used you, then rewrote the story. That's when I opened the project archive folder I hadn't touched since the launch. Buried deep in a subfolder, I found a photo file labeled Prototype A Haven Series. I checked the metadata. Originally created, January 14th. Modified, February 3rd. User, Eat Mercer. Updated by K. Ellington. She hadn't just taken the design. She'd gone in and erased my name from the record. Swapped out the attribution line, renamed the file, and re-uploaded it under her leadership folder. The version shown at the launch had my layout, my dimensions, even the slight curve I'd added to the base panel that no one else had liked, until now. I sat there, frozen for a moment. Not from shock. Not even from rage. Just a strange, still sadness. Like realizing a door you kept trying to fix was never actually yours.
I could have taken it to HR.
I could have printed it all out, marched into legal, and made a scene. But I didn't want revenge. I didn't want to win a technicality. I wanted my name back. And I wanted to stop letting them decide who I got to be. So I opened a new document, titled it Letter of Resignation, and started typing. My hands didn't shake. My chest didn't burn. I felt clear. I kept it simple. To whom it may concern. After 12 years of dedicated service, I am resigning from my position at NovaCraft Living, effective immediately. I'm choosing to leave not because I have no fight left in me, but because I've realized the fight itself has changed. Staying would require me to shrink, to smooth out the edges that make me who I am, to quietly accept that what I build can be taken and repackaged without consequence. I won't do that. Sincerely, E. Mercer. I added a second email, one just for the executive team. I'm not asking for a correction or an apology. I'm not interested in naming names or dragging reputations. But I want you to know this. I see what happened. And I hope someday you will too. I hit send. Then I sat back in my chair, turned off my screen, and just listened. Outside, the wind had picked up, brushing snow against the window in short, rhythmic bursts. But inside, it was quiet in a way that felt right. Not empty. Not defeated. Just free. I submitted my application to the Chicago Design Expo exactly 48 hours after I handed in my resignation. The form itself was unremarkable. A few boxes to fill out. Name, collection title, statement of intent. Under name, I didn't write NovaCraft. I typed, Edith Mercer Studio. Under collection title, I wrote the only words that had felt right for weeks. First light. And as I typed them, something unlatched inside me. It felt like breathing through a clean window after years of fog. Like finally hearing your own voice in a room where you'd been whispering for too long. When the green checkmark blinked onto the screen, your submission has been received. I didn't cheer or cry. I just closed my laptop, poured myself a glass of water, and sat in the silence like it was a friend I hadn't seen in years. The next day, I cleared out an old storage space a friend had offered me behind her letterpress shop in northeast Minneapolis. It wasn't much, concrete floor, walls stained with years of ink and ambition, but it felt honest. It smelled like dust and ink and something unfinished, like a place waiting to become something else. I swept it out slowly, like I was exhaling years of exhaustion one push at a time. Then I brought in a battered folding table, a second-hand drafting chair, my old thermos full of lukewarm coffee, and 3 cardboard boxes labeled YM, sketchbooks. I hadn't opened those boxes in over a decade. They held fragments of who I was before feedback loops and quarterly reports. For the first few days, I just sat in that space. It wasn't fear that held me back. It was unfamiliar freedom. No brand team to ask for alignment. No timeline to match. No one waiting for me to hit send. Eventually, though, my fingers found their rhythm. Pencil. Paper.
Pause.
Line work that didn't need to please anyone but me. I remembered what it felt like to create from instinct, not approval. And I started sleeping less, not from stress, but from some strange, wild hunger to keep going. On the 4th morning, as I was sorting through my old watercolor pencils, I received an email from Kara. Subject line, all the best. I clicked it open without expectation. Evelyn, we wanted to extend our best wishes as you begin this next chapter. Your time at NovaCraft will always be appreciated. That said, we do ask that you refrain from referencing proprietary materials or project details associated with a NovaCraft brand, particularly in external platforms like the Chicago Design Expo. We hope to part ways on mutually respectful terms. Best.
Kara.
I read it once, then twice, then a third time, slowly, letting each word sink in like cold water through cotton. It wasn't a threat, not outright. The tone was scrubbed clean, the kind of corporate polish that always pretends to wish you well while reminding you exactly where the line is. But I knew that tone. I'd heard it for years. It was the language of polite control, of power wrapped in velvet. Don't embarrass us. Don't make a mess. Don't shake the foundation, even if it was built on your back. I didn't write back. Not because I didn't have something to say, I had plenty. But I already knew it would fall on the same walls that had always echoed back silence. Instead, I printed the email and pinned it to the drywall just above the light switch in my new studio. So every morning, when I flipped on the lights, I'd remember exactly what I walked away from and why. That evening, I opened a blog I'd created years ago, but never published. The domain had collected dust like everything else that once belonged to just me. No followers. No comments. Just an empty space waiting for truth. I titled my first post, First Light, where the work begins again. I didn't name names. I didn't point fingers. I didn't have to. I wrote what I knew to be true. For years, I believed that if I played by the rules, the work would speak for itself. I stayed late. I said yes. I mentored quietly. I disappeared behind the word we. I believed in loyalty, in team, in something bigger than ego. But somewhere along the way, I forgot how to be seen. This is the first collection I've created without asking permission. It's not perfect. It's not polished. But it is mine. And if I've learned anything, it's this. Being right is not the same as being valued. I hit publish. There was no audience waiting. No algorithm to boost it. Just me and the truth, and a blinking cursor that finally stopped asking for approval. That night, I drove past NovaCraft.
Just to see it.
The lights were still on in a few offices, probably a pitch meeting or a late-night production call. But the building looked different now. Smaller. Duller. Like a place I'd dreamed up and outgrown. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel regret. What I felt was simple.
Clear.
Like the sky after the snow finally stops falling. The Chicago Design Expo was bigger than I expected. Inside the sprawling convention center, it was all polished concrete floors, glass dividers, dramatic lighting. You could practically hear the hum of ambition in the air, new brands launching, big names networking, interns running coffee in dress shoes too stiff to bend. And there I was. Booth 318. Tucked in the far right wing of the exhibitor floor. No glossy banner, no video reel, no fancy marketing kit. Just a handmade wooden sign that read Mercer Studio, a fold-out table covered in soft linen, and 6 carefully crafted models from the First Light collection. I set it all up myself. Every curve, every edge, every label typed and printed in my home office. It wasn't flashy, but it was mine. The first few hours were quiet. People walked by, glanced, smiled politely. A few stopped to run their fingers over the edges of the pieces, mostly soft-spoken designers, the kind who didn't talk much but noticed everything. And then, slowly, the conversation started. Is this walnut? What's the story behind the edge beveling? Are you showing in Seattle next? I answered each question with a kind of peace I didn't expect to feel. No pressure to sell, no urge to impress. Just connection, real and unfiltered. Midway through the afternoon, a woman with a press badge approached me. Middle-aged, stylish in that casual editorial way. She looked around the booth, running a hand along the top of one of the side tables. This is refreshing, she said. Everything else today feels like it's trying to shout. Yours whispers. I smiled. Whispers have their place. She pulled out a small recorder. Mind if I ask, what inspired this collection? I paused for a moment, watching the light from the overhead glass ceiling fall across my work. Then I said, I used to design for approval. For market trends, corporate goals, brand voices. But this time, I designed for me. For clarity. For truth. I don't design to please anymore. She nodded, pressed stop, and said softly, That'll resonate. And just as she walked away, I saw her.
Kara.
She hadn't changed much. Sleek navy blazer, heels clicking confidently, hair pulled back like always. She was walking the floor with a few people from NovaCraft, probably vetting new talent. And then, for the briefest moment, her eyes landed on my booth. On First Light. She froze. I watched recognition flicker across her face. The curve of the bench, the grain of the wood, the title etched onto the tag. She knew. She remembered. But she didn't say anything. She turned her head and kept walking, quicker now, her group hurrying to catch up. I didn't follow. I didn't call her out. I didn't need to. Silence can be sharp when it's honest. A little later, as I was adjusting one of the centerpieces, I heard a soft voice behind me. I saw her stop. I turned. It was David Hanley, former senior designer at NovaCraft. We'd worked together for nearly 8 years. He'd always been kind, quiet, and frustratingly loyal to the chain of command. She didn't say anything, I replied. He shrugged. She didn't have to. We all knew. A lot of us did. But we were afraid of being next. There was a pause before he added, You did what we should have.
I didn't know what to say.
So I just nodded. That evening, after the show floor closed, a woman approached me with a business card. She introduced herself as the creative director of a boutique furniture company in Seattle. We've been following your work, she said. We love the tone, the restraint, the heart. If you're open to it, we'd like to discuss a full collaboration. Full freedom. You'd set the tone. It would have been everything I once thought I wanted. But I didn't hesitate. I appreciate that, I said. Really? But I think, for the first time, I need to do this alone. Build something that doesn't ask me to explain who I am before I create. She smiled. That's rare. Let me know if you change your mind. I held her card for a moment after she left, then tucked it into my notebook, not as a backup, but as a reminder that I had options now. Not obligations. Just choices. I stayed a little longer in the hall, walking past the booths, taking in the lights and energy. And as I turned back to my quiet little corner, I caught sight of my sign again, plain, unbranded, honest. And I thought, maybe that's enough. It was a quiet afternoon in early spring, the kind where the wind no longer bites but carries just enough chill to keep you grounded. The kind of afternoon where the world feels paused, like it's catching its breath. I was in my studio, dusting off a few shelves, rearranging some samples, letting a soft classical piece hum through the old radio near the window. A mug of chamomile tea sat beside a stack of papers on my workbench. Not blueprints, not client notes, just a new idea forming. The early sketches for a collection I'd started days earlier, inspired by a verse that had stayed with me through everything. Let your light so shine before men. Matthew 5 verse 16. That verse used to mean something entirely different to me. I used to think it was about proving my worth, showing up perfectly polished, winning approval to validate my light. Now I understood it better. It wasn't about being seen. It was about not hiding, even when no one's looking. That's what I was thinking when a ping echoed from my phone. A message from a former colleague, just a link to an industry article. The headline read, NovaCraft's creative director reassigned amid internal review on IP concerns. I didn't even need to read the whole thing to know what it meant. No lawsuits. No public scandal. Just a quiet shift, a name moved off a leadership page, a paragraph at the bottom of a newsletter. The kind of professional reshuffling that never makes the front page, but still leaves a mark. A dozen people would whisper. A few would raise eyebrows. And Kara, once the golden name in every meeting, would now carry a shadow wherever she went. I closed the article and let the phone rest screen down beside my cup. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just breathed. Because when the truth finally makes its way to the surface, on its own, without force, that breath is enough. And that moment reminded me of something Jeanette once told me, back in Hope Cafe, over chipped mugs and shared weariness. You don't need to burn the house down to prove you built it. A week later, I received an email through my website's contact form. The sender was a college student from Oregon, a junior in industrial design. Her message was short but stayed with me longer than most of my career reviews ever had. I read your blog. I've been stuck at a place that doesn't see me. I didn't know someone could walk away and still keep their dignity intact.
Thank you. I sat with that for a long while.
I thought about all the years I believed silence was strength. That if I just did the work, someone would notice. That gratitude came to those who never asked for it. And how wrong that turned out to be. Now, the orders that come through my email are many. Mostly small batch requests from local shops, a boutique cafe looking for handcrafted stools, a church wanting warm, quiet altar benches. Nothing big, nothing flashy, but they come to me. With my name on the invoice, my design at the center. I can take a walk at 10 a.m. if I want to. Stay up late working by candlelight. Scrap an idea just because it doesn't feel honest. No approvals. No politics. No layers of branding to peel through. That's what freedom looks like when you've earned it. And in this stillness, this simple rhythm of making, shaping, releasing, I found something I never got from any award, promotion, or polished annual review.
Peace.
I don't carry bitterness toward NovaCraft. I don't need to. That chapter is closed, and it taught me more than I ever expected. But more than that, it revealed something I'd nearly forgotten. I was never made to be hidden behind someone else's ambition. I used to pray that God would give me strength to keep my seat at the table. I begged for endurance, for tolerance, for some kind of justification for staying where I was no longer seen. But He gave me something else instead. He gave me courage to leave, to build a table of my own. I no longer need to walk back into NovaCraft. There's nothing for me to prove there. Because when you finally know what you're worth, you don't wait to be invited to speak. You just stand. And you stand tall. Before we close this story, I just want to say something, not as a narrator, but as someone who's been there. Sometimes the hardest part isn't walking away, it's realizing you've stayed too long in a place that no longer sees you. And when you finally choose yourself, it doesn't feel like triumph. It feels quiet.
Scary.
but deeply right. Maybe you've been in Evelyn's shoes. Or maybe you're there now. If this story stirred something in you, I hope you'll stay with me for the next one. Because stories like this, we don't just listen to them. We feel them. And sometimes, they help us find the words we didn't know we needed. Have you ever had to reclaim your voice? I'd love to hear what that looked like for you.